What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, we got to talk about the Xbox 360 Marketplace. I felt this channel here was a good place to do this. We've done several RIP type videos, whether it's Battlefield Bad Company 2, and I guess technically 1, or many Battlefield games, Knockout City, Friday the 13th, and many more. This time, we have an entire ecosystem that's being killed off, and I kind of want to just reflect on the 360, talk about what's going on, and what has happened, I guess, in case you guys didn't know. This doesn't just impact those that are still living on the 360. I highly doubt there's that many people that are still doing it, right? So technically, if you fire up your Xbox 360, you go to the store, you won't be able to do anything, right? When it comes to the future Xbox consoles, which includes obviously the current gen we're in right now, Xbox Series S and X, up until last night, you were able to go onto the store and, you can see the 360 games. There's a specific 360 marketplace also online, just in general, that you can, I think it's easier to actually do it online versus the Xbox Series X, but you could do that as well. Now, it's only buying them. Downloading them is actually separate, and I'm pretty thankful for that. We've seen games be destroyed. We've seen ecosystems. Nintendo has done it before, actually. We've seen ecosystems be taken out where you can't even download, right? So bad news is, what's happened, and we'll talk about that more. But good news is, if you own 360 games, you're still able to download and play them. But this just wipes out a certain section of them. There's actually a YouTube channel I want to shout out, From the Void Games. He's done an insane, unbelievable, hour-plus long videos, hundreds upon probably thousands of games actually in all, talking about what exactly gets impacted by the store closing. So I'm not going to go too much into that. I want to talk about it, generally, but if you're looking for, hey, is X, a specific game, impacted, you might want to check out his channel. I mean, ultimately, it's the 360 games, right, that are impacted, so you got to think the biggest ones are probably going to be indies, deeper cuts, a lot of DLCs. So DLCs sometimes that were only on 360 games and never carried over. There are obviously some 360 games that jumped to the Xbox One, and even some DLCs that would jump with it, or Game of the Year editions, or things like that. And those are still playable, right? Or those are still purchasable. But games that are trapped, games that maybe have DLC, whether the game jumped or didn't, maybe the DLC is trapped on 360. And then again, like I said, mainly, I don't want to say, I guess mainly, but I mean, indie games take up a huge, percentage of this, right? And just some of the deeper cuts. So it's sad. It's an incredibly sad time. You hate to see it happen. With a PlayStation ecosystem, we actually fought and won. If you recall, PlayStation was going to shut down the PS3 and the PS Vita stores, and that would have been freaking tragic, and it still can be. I mean, you let this go, 360 happens, PlayStation might be looking at it and saying, well, if the 360 store is out, why not do the PS3 store? The Vita store is just so special. I can't even imagine, not having it, but this is the consequence, right, of just moving generations. Look, do I understand it to a degree? I guess. I mean, it's like we always say, really, with any of these games, right, that are eliminated from Planet Earth that these companies do, I understand it to an extent. I get it to an extent. And it's like, for a Battlefield, for example, right? Like, you're paying for the servers, you're paying for these things, and you're probably not paying too much, but is the cost worth keeping this thing around when nobody's using it? And ultimately, there had to have been some behind-the-scenes math done, right, where it's like, keeping the 360 store active is more expensive, or it's just not worth it because there's just not a lot of people doing it. Now, to lead into today, or lead up to today, you had sales, unbelievable, 80, 90, 95% off of games. Games were going for like $2, $3, $4, $5, and some pretty darn good ones. I was trying to look at, like, okay, are there any deeper cuts that maybe aren't available on PlayStation? Because that was another thing I was trying to keep in mind. Is there any ones not on PlayStation? Is there any ones that I don't already have for, physical? That does move me to the next part of this, right? Because one of the things is I kind of wanted to buy some, and at the same time I was like, well, if you're going to do this for a thing that's going to be eliminated, right? Now, again, you can download and you can still play these games, but it's still all on the internet, it's still connected here, and they eliminate the idea or the ability of purchasing it, online in general. So I was thinking, well, I'll just, maybe some of these games, I'll write them down, or I'll check these different YouTube channels or YouTube videos, and I'll try to get them physically. But the one thing that's very, very scary, not just in like what this does for the future, right? Because what this does for the future is PS3 and Vita, I think, are a relatively fair game, and I would not be surprised if Sony tries again within the next year or so to take those offline. We will fight it, and hopefully we will win like we did the first time, but you never know, right? But the other thing is, well, the physical market, right? So this is an entire generation that's being wiped out in terms of, the ability to get these games. Well, what does that do, right? A supply and demand that's going to raise the prices of them physically. I still don't have one game in particular I always think about is Lost Odyssey, the 2008 JRPG. I never got it. It's going for $20. I don't know if it's been, if the price has raised physically, but I think it might, because a game like that is actually kind of the perfect example of games that are still trapped. A lot of Xbox games did jump. They really did. It's sometimes the third-party ones that stayed and whatnot, but, some of them jumped. Some of them, like, I saw videos of talking about Naughty Bear, which actually I've talked about before. Naughty Bear was actually already gone from the store for, like, 6 months. Like, I think they took it out back in, like, January or February. So some of the more impactful ones that I was thinking of that are going to get impacted from it, they were actually already gone like half a year, maybe even a year ago. So, but still, like the Lost Odysseys of the world, right? You think the 360 games that are either trapped or, again, games that if they made the jump, maybe DLCs or Game of the Year or whatever, maybe they didn't. But it's also the memory, you know what I mean? Like, and I always talk about, on this channel, really all my channels, like, I did grow up in my teenage years. I actually grew up on PS3. PlayStation was like my preferred, and I could only afford one, and I chose that one. But the 360 was a special console. It still is, really, but it's a very special console. My friends, my very, very close friends, I would always go over to their house, and just the layout of the 360, the layout of the store, the layout of everything is just, ingrained in my head, where, I just remember it, and it really was an icon, of that era. So it is truly sad to see something so impactful. And the 360 dominated. Like, the 360 is probably, I don't know if it's like official, but I assume it's like the best console that Xbox has ever made. I think it was maybe the most financially successful. Xbox One and Series S and X haven't done nearly as well. That's really where Xbox stepped up their game, and you think to some of the best, franchises, and, maybe they start on Xbox, but they kind of hit their stride, or maybe they did just start in general on the 360. So it sucks. It's another example of these things where you kind of get it, but at the same time, I wish there was a way to keep these things alive forever. It just gives more ammunition to people like me, right, where we always have physical stuff, and you can never trust these things. And, in a vacuum, and also I think just in general, this is kind of why. Like, if you can shut an entire store down to stop people from buying it, and it's not maybe out of malicious intent, but you're doing it and you are stopping this thing forever, right? Then what else can you do, right? Again, there is a divide between stopping people from buying to also stopping people from playing. And thank the Lord that they're still, allowing people to play. But you have to have it, right? So if you're jumping in right now, and again, it's not just people that are still on Xbox 360. I assume there's maybe like 5 of those people. But, it's people nowadays that maybe want to look back and pick up some 360 games, and now they're not going to be able to do that unless, of course, you did all these deals just recently. So sad times. I hope it doesn't happen. I pray to God actually it doesn't happen with PlayStation, with PS3 and Vita, but I just wanted to kind of have this video go out there to talk about the 360 store. And, while I didn't necessarily take advantage, it was more, I'm still probably going to. I mean, those games, I think some games were literally lost forever. That's the sad thing. Like, I might not know them off the top of my head. I only watched a couple of From the Void's videos, but again, he's made multiple, and he's covered like thousands of games. I'm sure there's a couple hundred, or at least a couple dozen, that are literally gone. Because some of those indies too, you got to remember, like, they didn't get physical actual copies in general. So literally and that's why I get scared now. When games only are coming out digitally, it's like, well, in 20 years, you got to think about that. You know what I mean? That's really what you got to think about. That happened in the 360 and PS3 era. There were some indies and some kind of under-the-radar gems that did not get physical launches. And 19 years for this, right? But you think 15, 20 years later, they are gone forever. Again, you can play them, but only if you bought it. So, I mean, new generations can't do it. And you think nowadays to games that are only coming out digitally, you think 10, 15, 20 years from now, those games could absolutely be taken from you. And that's why I get so worried. And that's why I'm so kind of a forceful in my speech patterns, for that stuff. So let me know what your guys' experience with the 360 and the marketplace was. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.